we can't maintain over its life. Dr. Etter?
Well, I would add to that. I think there is a real challenge to academia to figure out how are we going to address those kids, because they're going to come in and they're going to be bored to death with traditional curriculum. So we're working very hard to try to do that. One of the key things I've found is you've got to get young people involved in something they find interesting. So we're doing a lot more with small projects early on. You know, design used to be something you'd get to when you were a senior in engineering, not today. It's at your freshman level. So you've got to get them involved, working in teams, working in challenging projects, so that they really do find that there's things they don't know. And when they get in environments where there's some things they want to do and they don't know how to do it, it's great motivation for those next courses that they're going to be taking. But it really is a challenge to figure out how to keep them motivated. I have a large research program here in biometrics, so we're doing iris recognition, face recognition, and it's a great example of an area that you can get interested in very quickly because you can understand the importance of it. You can play with the commercial technology, and then when you get to the research problems, they're really hard. And so that's a motivating type of factor, but I think it's the hands-on things you've got to do. You know, they're just not satisfied coming in and you say, you need to learn this because when you graduate, it's going to be important to getting a job and to, you know, the job you want to be able to do. So it's challenging all of us, not just parents, but it's challenging academia to figure out how to deal with them. I will tell you the other challenge is we have young people that have had all of these opportunities to be the digital student. But then you get kids coming in from other areas, and particularly as you start to look at people coming in that have come from economically challenged areas. They don't have that. So what do you do when you get these mixed together? How do you deal with the mix? How do you get the kids that are bright but just haven't had some of those experiences? You know, there's a lot of kids that don't have the summer programs and the things like that that help you get up to speed with some of those things. So there's challenges all around, but we've got to face up to it because figuring out how we take advantage of those skills is really important.
Phil, your thoughts?
I just wanted to add, and it's I think very apropos, my wife was commenting to me a couple years ago about my son playing Modern Warfare, and she just made a comment. And she's a Army veteran psychiatrist, so I tend to listen to her when she says something. She said, "This is a relatively violent game," and so I went and just observed my son, and I made the decision he wasn't going to play the game. And what I did is I went and got Band of Brothers, and we sat and we watched Band of Brothers. And after the 5th episode, he turned to me and he said, "Dad, I see why you stopped having me play the game. You wanted me to understand what I was doing." So I took that lesson learned and then applied it in our own company, and this is the theme to answer the question. A lot of skills out there, okay? We have young engineers that, you know, drink juice boxes while they're coding stuff that I can't even imagine. A lot of skills. What we try to do is take those skills and take them out of the skill set to an understanding point of why that skill is important and how it integrates. We take those kids and take them to an air show, let them touch an airplane, let them talk to an operator, and all of a sudden when they go back and in their coding and doing their thing, they realize the importance or the significance or the betterment of what their skill is. So I think that's one of the techniques that we've found effective.
Okay, next question from the audience. We got 3 right here in the front row, second row.
Hello, my name's Bill Barnett. Thank you all for being here. I'm thinking it was about 35 or 40 years ago, I think I was the youngest Army officer assigned to the Office of Secretary of Defense. And at the time, I remember people talking about the challenge, especially for the Navy and the Air Force, but also for the Army, about how we can buy more things that may not be quite so capable, rather than trying to really buy the great thing. Now that's 35 or 40 years ago. Today, of course, we have that problem, or that challenge, at least in steroids. And so my question is this. This morning at the first panel, there was some discussion of the need for scale in the procurements that we have. And it strikes me that the industry, and of course the former Navy procurement head, probably would have some insight as to what it is that causes us to continually try to invent the perfect device that we can only buy. How many of the latest Air Force bomber did we buy? A very small number.
20.
21. So how is it that we devise the perfect bomber that we can buy a total of 21 on? And if you buy the 21, what if there's something wrong with it that you didn't anticipate? Or what if there's some kind of surprising defense against it? And it's just able to obliterate the whole thing. Isn't that highly risky? And so what is it about our military-industrial complex that produces these kinds of answers rather than multiples of things that are kind of good enough?
I think that's your swim lane.
Well, I think what drives it is the fact that so often it's not just logic that determines what you're going to build or how you're going to try to respond to the warfighter's need. It takes a lot of things working together. And so when you want to put in a new platform, a large system, those don't happen very often. So when you are going to do one, there's this natural sense, I think, from both industry and the military side, if it's the only one you're going to get for the next 10 years, you want to put a lot into it. So there's a drive to just make it bigger and bigger. And then once it kind of gets going, trying to stop that and slow it down and take some things off is almost impossible because now you've got political issues. You know, there's a good reason why when you look at a large military platform, it has companies from every state that's working on it. Because if you want to slow that platform down, there's no way politically you can do it. So it's a very ugly system, and it's very hard to, once it's started, do that. And you know, a great example of where we just let requirements kill a program was the presidential helicopter. That was one of those that was my program for a couple of years. You know, what happens, you come in and you start very few programs, but you pick them up and do the best you can with them while you had them. And the presidential helicopter started off with a good plan, and we just kept adding and adding and adding until it was too much. It really killed the program because it changed its form so much. So I think it's a really hard program. Probably the best way to do that, and I think the acquisition community has tried to do some things in the recent years. You know, if we go to more spiral systems, start small, but have a plan built in to increase it. You know, the ENF-18 is probably a good example of that. We had a number of versions. It's now even gone from the Super Hornet now to the Growler. You know, if you start with something and you try not to put all the bells and whistles on it, that's your best bet of doing it. Building prototypes is another one. But I think, you know, it's a very challenging thing because there are so few new programs now. People want to put way too much. Modular is another great thing to do. I would have to say the Littoral Combat Ship is one that I think has benefited from some of that because it's in many ways an empty ship. It has some weapons on it, but it's pretty much empty. And you have these modules you bring onto it. So you can bring on things to make it a humanitarian aid. It can be mine hunting. It can be just about anything you can think of, soft capabilities. So you would hope we're learning that lesson more, but it is a challenge, and it's because of so many different constituencies, I think.
Dan?
Yeah, I think part of the question, though, is why do we start them in the first place? If you know, I'm not a historian, and Bob will correct me if I get it wrong, but if you go back and look at the cycle of those, most of those big platforms like the Joint Strike Fighter tend to come at the tail end of a down cycle or the beginning of a down cycle, where we have just come out of a conflict. We've had large human losses associated with it. We have you know, a total rejection of going back to conflict again, and so we want to get both into the clean war, so we can kill from afar, and/or we want to prevent, and we believe that prevention can come about by deterrence of high-end capability associated with that, and we build requirements. You also have, in that same period of time, an imbalance and a rebalancing of the budget as you go through it. During the conflict periods, what you'll see is an incremental increase in the dollars going to the ground forces, the Marine Corps and the Army. We saw it in the last 10 years, you know, 0.5%, 0.75% change in their outlays as you go through that. As you come back out of that, there's kind of a evening up again, you know, the rest of the services trying to get back in. For 10 years, you haven't invested in me, invest in me now, and you get these big items on the table. So somehow we have to, I think, address why we started them in the first place. And then the second piece is this whole notion about making them upgradable platforms from the beginning, and thinking about not the platform, but thinking about who's occupying the platform. You know, and in the industrial age, it was all about manning the equipment. You built the best piece of equipment you could, and then you figured out how do you recruit and train the operator for that piece of equipment. You know, and in the information age, it's changing. What you really want to do is you want to equip the soldier or the airman or the Marine or the sailor in the process, and start with this new warrior that we're going to have in Army uniform, you know, 10 years from now, and think about that individual, you know, and build the new platforms around those individuals in a modular kind of way.
So I'll take a quick shot at that as well, and then we'll get the question in the back. And certainly Norm Augustine's laws book gives a good treatment of how we ended up buying one exquisite fighter or bomber. So I'd encourage you to read that if you haven't. Where I want to approach this is from an acquisition policy point of view. And the budget pressures that exist today are driving the government more towards you know, winner-take-all competitions and necking down industry. And maybe that's a good thing. It may be unrealistic for us to preserve the sort of industrial base that we had coming out of World War II or Vietnam even till today. You know, we used to have 1 million more people in aerospace and defense just in Southern California, and that's all largely gone now. And the question is, how do you maintain a industrial base in an environment when there's a winner-take-all, whether it's for space launch, for fighters, for shipyards, and we're making those choices right now, often driven by economic necessity more than maybe operational needs. There are some sort of macro trends maybe driving it in the right way. If you think about the old industrial base being driven by the first paradigm of the original industrial base being driven by craft manufacturing, small groups of people building a few products, and then evolving to mass production, World War II, scientific management, scale, and then now going into the sort of the third paradigm of manufacturing around mass customization and building fewer products customized to the need faster with the same economies as you had with mass production. We're not quite there yet. There's some cool technologies coming in terms of rapid prototyping and taking CAD models directly to a deliverable product. They're not quite there in competition, but it may be that we end up with a defense industry that is in fact smaller, more innovative, more affordable, and yet can still meet the real-time needs, urgent operational needs of the warfighter. I think that's what Dr. Carter and others aspire to. We're not quite there yet, but that's where we're going. I think we have time for 2 more questions quickly.
I'm not going to quite know the question I want to ask, but I'll give the scenario and you all can then help me flesh this out a little more. I'm Carl Stone. I'm a PhD student here at SMU. We've touched on the question, killing from afar, the illustration about modern warfare, the video game, and we're moving into an era of clean combat in some respects, and yet we still have soldiers on boots on the ground. And I'm reminded of a time in college in ROTC where I was at Fort Knox for training, and we had our little MEPS program running around, laser tag. It was, you know, lots of fun. I never quite understood warfare though until we had a course where we actually crawling in the sand, and I had, you know, sand all up and down in every crack and crevice possible, and dynamite going off and tracers firing overhead. And that was the first time I kind of got an inkling of what it meant to be in combat, and said something to the drill instructor. So now I know what war is like, and after I had done 50 or 60 push-ups for being a smart ass, he said that's nothing like it. So what I'm trying to kind of gravitate around is, as we move into this new kind of era of technology, how is the defense industry dealing with the ethics of this kind of sanitized combat, or does that just wind up being a question for the officer corps and the non-commissioned officers, that they deal with the question of ethics, and the defense industry supplies what is needed? I would assume not, but this is kind of where I'm going. I'm not quite sure what the specific question is.
Dan, do you want to take that?
Yeah, let me refer to it in two ways. Last night, when I got back to the hotel, I flipping through the channels as I was doing some work, and in the military channel, there was the General LeMay's bombing of Tokyo. And you kind of went through that, and he had a comment at the end, that if we hadn't have won, he'd have probably been tried for war crimes. It didn't make it right or wrong as you went through it. The second vignette goes to my own experience in Desert Storm, having been in Vietnam and experienced combat before. I spent most of my time in the preparatory days going into combat with individual soldiers in small groups, trying to get them to recognize that at the end of the day, war was an individual affair, and that each one of them individually would have to deal with his or her spiritual well-being as he went through that. Because the nature of killing a human being is not normal for us as we go through it. And so at some time in the conflict, before, during, or after, they were going to have to deal with that. I don't think that's any different for individuals in industry than it is for those in the military uniform. That as they process through what they're doing, they have to go through those same spiritual, emotional, moral issues and settle with themselves and their higher being as you go through it.
Okay, time for one more question right here in the back.
Hello, Annie Wong with the RAND Corporation. I really agree with what Dr. Etter said about growing the human capital. So I'd like to hear more about what academia, Department of Defense, and industry could do, creating the kind of scenarios or projects you're talking about to get more students excited about working in this area. And also, I appreciate viewpoint from those who are with the private sector, because there is a real cost to taking interns, for example. And there is a real cost to providing, kinds of project opportunities and all that. So what are some of the options to making some of these young people who are in STEM programs today to actually choose to pursue a career in STEM? Because many finish STEM programs, but they do not necessarily go into STEM work as a career option because of pay and other considerations. And also I've heard, for instance, just because you come out of a STEM program doesn't mean you have all the right skills you need to be successful in industry. For example, should they be taking some courses in political science, in project management, and other areas so that they will be more successful when they get into their career? Now, the other half of this question is, today already, more of our university students and those who actually graduate are women. I've done many projects with the Army in the last several years. The biggest thing the Army is worried about in the recruiting and retention of physicians is the fact that, for example, most of the students in medical school today are women, and they do not necessarily see the military as a career option. And 70% of the vets or student population vet schools are women, and most of them see themselves running small companion animal clinics. And these are the public health officers that we need. They are very critical. So what about the role of women in STEM education and STEM workforce? Thank you.
Okay, do you want to pick one part of that out and take it on?
I'll pick one part of it. And I will say the group I have decided to focus on with the institute that I head up, the Caruth Institute, is middle school kids, because we feel like that's where we have the most opportunity to make a difference. We don't want them stopping taking math courses, science courses. So we're trying to work there. And, you know, at that point, you're not talking them into going into a STEM career. That's too far ahead. What we want to do is just get them opening up options they never thought about and understanding there's things out there that should be things they consider and that they have the opportunity to have those as options. And the thing that we have picked up on, and it has to do with my research area, I told you I have a research area in biometrics. We've all seen the crime scene investigation shows. So we have developed a set of camps. We have CSI girls and we have CSI boys. And I will tell you the Office of Naval Research funds that, so I'm really pleased for that. And so we bring in 60 kids, 60 girls for a week-long program, 60 boys. We use my undergraduate students as the counselors, so they're the role models. And we start off with a crime that's just happened, and they have their little notebooks and they take notes. And during the week, we go through the technology, because it's very important they see real content, technology. It's not just fun, but technology. And they start to learn how to figure out how to solve the crime. So they're learning how to dust for fingerprints. They're learning how to use paper chromatography. They're learning how to do all kinds of things to solve the problem. We bring in law enforcement people, SWAT teams, K-9 teams. It's great fun, but they go home understanding, here's some of the reasons why I need to go to the math. For example, face recognition is ratios. So we're trying to do that. We're expanding it. We now do a teacher camp because we only get a small number of kids, but now we have a CSI teacher camp where we teach middle school teachers. And then we've just started a CSI camp for a day. Now, my DOD background is where all of this really focuses because that's where I've gotten the funding for these camps. The CSI camp for a day, you know, we all want to have an impact, and you have to do more than just local programs if you're going to have an impact. So we're taking our CSI camp for a day, which is a day out of our week-long camp. We're taking it across the country. We're doing it near large military bases. We work with the middle schools, so we get it's about 100 kids for each one, and they come from the public school system. So it winds up about a third of the kids are from military families, which we think is really great. And we do that. We're going to do those around the country. DOD's funding it. We've had great success because it's exciting for the kids. They see the technology, but that's the way we're trying to do it. It is a challenge to do. To get them excited about it because they've got a long road ahead if they're going to major in those areas. So they have to be excited about it.
Okay, well, given that we're at the end of our time, let me just first of all thank our panelists for joining us today and ask that you give them a round of applause for their comments. And then I'd just like to also acknowledge the Tower Center for providing this forum for industry. Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you. Thank you.